You want to know the moment I knew I'd screwed up beyond repair? It was when he asked if I thought he was my soulmate, and I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You were just the most convenient option." I'm Veronica, 29, and yeah, I'm that person in the relationship who says the quiet part out loud when I'm angry. Everyone has those thoughts sometimes. I'm just the idiot who actually says them. I never saw Huey as my dream guy, not even close. But 6 years ago, when we met at that industry conference, he checked all the practical boxes my therapist said I should look for after my disaster of an ex. Stable job in finance? Check. No substance issues? Check. Calls when he says he will? Check. I told myself I was being smart, mature even. Truth is, I settled for safe and got bored out of my mind. Don't get me wrong, Huey's a decent guy, too decent sometimes. He remembers birthdays, plans actual dates, and listens when I talk. But there's something missing. That spark, that challenge, that feeling that makes your stomach drop when they walk in the room. Maybe I'm broken, but after 3 years of marriage, all I felt when he walked in was nothing. Just another evening of predictable conversation, and his endless optimism that grated on my nerves more each day. I started keeping score of everything pretty early on. He'd forget to take out the trash, and I'd file it away, building my case for why he wasn't pulling his weight. Meanwhile, I'd conveniently forget when he cooked dinner 3 nights in a row or stayed up helping me prepare for a work presentation. My friends thought I hit the jackpot with Huey, so around them, I'd play the part of grateful wife. Then we'd get home, and I'd pick apart everything he said at dinner, making these little cutting remarks about how he embarrassed me in front of my friends. Our finances? That's a whole other mess I created. I insisted on separate accounts for independence, but what that really meant was I had a secret savings account he knew nothing about, while still expecting him to cover most of our household expenses. Your job pays more, I'd say, even though the gap wasn't that big. I'd drop hundreds on things I wanted, but scrutinize every dollar he spent on his hobbies. When he finally stood up for himself about wanting to join this rock climbing gym, I found ways to sabotage it. Suddenly remembering emergencies right when he was supposed to go, making him feel guilty for spending time away from me. The worst part is how I held on to every mistake he ever made. That time 4 years ago, when he forgot my coworker's name, brought it up last month during an argument about something completely unrelated. The comment he made about my dress at his company party 2 years ago, I've referenced it at least 20 times. Meanwhile, I've completely forgotten about the time I got drunk and flirted with his friend, or when I accidentally deleted an important email from his mom about his grandmother's health. I didn't want passion or unpredictability. Those things reminded me too much of my dad, who left when I was 12. I wanted someone who wouldn't leave, someone stable I could count on being there. But instead of appreciating that quality in Huey, I resented him for it, called him boring in my head, sometimes even to his face disguised as a joke. Whenever he tried to have serious conversations about our future, kids, moving, career changes, I'd make vague promises I had no intention of keeping, just to end the conversation. I remember this one night, about a year into our marriage. We were having dinner, and Huey was talking about maybe starting his own business someday. His eyes lit up as he described his ideas, and instead of encouraging him, I systematically shot down every point. That market's oversaturated. You don't have enough experience. We can't afford the risk. With each statement, his enthusiasm dimmed a little more. By dessert, he'd changed the subject entirely. I told myself I was being realistic, protecting us both from disappointment. Really, I just couldn't stand seeing him excited about something that didn't involve me. The promotion at work was my perfect escape route. Suddenly, I had legitimate reasons to stay late, travel on weekends, and avoid the suffocating normalcy of my marriage. That's when Darren entered the picture. My colleague, with the sharp suits and sharper tongue. He wasn't conventionally attractive like Huey, but he had this intensity, this ambition that made my stomach flip when he leaned over my desk to review reports. We weren't cheating, not physically anyway, but those late-night strategy sessions and inside jokes, the texts at 11 p.m. about work, even I wasn't that naive. When Huey asked about my sudden schedule changes, I unleashed the most manipulative version of myself. Wow, so I finally get some career success and you can't handle it? Do you remember when I supported you through your certification program? I guess that doesn't count now. I'd bring up something from 3 years ago to make him feel guilty for questioning me now. The look on his face, confusion mixed with shame, made me feel powerful in the moment, but hollow later that night. The night he asked about a text from Darren that popped up while my phone was on the table, I literally walked away mid-conversation and locked myself in the bathroom for an hour. I came out with puffy eyes, making sure he saw I'd been crying, even though I'd just been scrolling through Instagram. "I can't believe you don't trust me after everything," I whispered. He apologized to me for asking a perfectly reasonable question. And I let him. I started withholding affection like it was currency. If he didn't read my mind about what I wanted for dinner, or said something that annoyed me at breakfast, I'd turn away when he tried to kiss me goodbye. Some nights, I'd pretend to be asleep when he came to bed. Other nights, I'd be overwhelmingly affectionate, keeping him perpetually off balance, never knowing which version of me he'd get. The real kicker? I started helping Darren with his business plan, the exact same type of venture Huey had been talking about starting for 2 years. When Huey shared his ideas, I'd call them unrealistic and list all the reasons he might fail. Then I'd turn around and spend hours helping Darren refine the same concept, feeling alive in a way I hadn't in years. I'd cancel plans with Huey claiming work emergencies that were actually just drinks with Darren to discuss his business. When Huey finally called me out for seeming distant and uninterested in our relationship, I looked at him like he was speaking another language and said, "You're being way too sensitive. Maybe this is why I don't want to spend time with you." There was this Thursday night when Huey had planned this whole special dinner because I'd mentioned offhand that we never do anything spontaneous anymore. He'd gotten off work early, cooked my favorite meal, even bought flowers. I walked in 2 hours late, didn't apologize, and immediately complained about how tired I was. I watched him try to hide his disappointment, to pivot and suggest we just relax instead. That's the thing about Huey. He was always adjusting to my moods, always trying to make things work. And somehow, that just made me respect him less. I became bolder with each passing week. I stopped hiding Darren's texts but manufactured reasons to check Huey's phone. "Can I order takeout from your phone?" "Mine's dead," I'd say, even though it was fully charged next to me. Meanwhile, I'd leave my own phone face down or take it to the bathroom every time it chimed. I forgot Huey's work promotion dinner, but remembered to send Darren a congratulatory message when his fantasy football team won. Little things that added up to one big message. "You're not my priority." The weekend Huey planned our anniversary getaway was when I realized how far gone I was. He'd booked this cute cabin upstate, arranged for my favorite meal to be prepared, even remembered to pack that book I'd mentioned wanting to read months ago. All I could think was how inconvenient the timing was. I'd have to reschedule drinks with Darren. Instead of appreciating the effort, I found fault with everything. The cabin was too rustic, the restaurant choice too predictable, the weekend itself too planned. I watched disappointment cloud his features with each complaint, and instead of stopping, I doubled down. On our last night there, we had the fight that changed everything. He brought up my emotional distance, asking if there was someone else. Instead of answering, I went nuclear. "Maybe if you weren't so insecure about everything, I wouldn't need space from you. You're suffocating me like your father did to your mother. No wonder she left." I knew exactly what I was doing. His parents' divorce was his deepest wound. His father's controlling behavior, the thing he feared inheriting most. Using it against him was unforgivable, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. The drive home was silent. Instead of apologizing, I pretended to sleep, then spent the next day acting like nothing happened. When he tried to bring it up, I redirected. "Shouldn't you be focusing on your presentation tomorrow instead of rehashing old arguments?" At work on Monday, I told Darren a completely distorted version of my weekend, casting myself as the long-suffering wife of an emotionally stunted man. The sympathy in his eyes fed something ugly in me. This narrative where I was always right, always the victim, never the villain in my own story. Looking back, I realize I was testing him, pushing boundaries, seeing how much he would take, almost wanting him to snap, to give me a reason to leave that wouldn't make me the bad guy. But Huey wasn't built like that. He absorbed the blows, tried to understand, kept trying to fix things. He bought self-help books about communication, suggested counseling, tried different approaches to reach me. I mocked him for it, called him weak for needing help, while secretly feeling terrified that anyone could see through my behavior in therapy. There was this one night when he fell asleep on the couch after working a 14-hour day. Instead of letting him rest, I woke him up to complain that he hadn't taken out the recycling. When he apologized and got up to do it immediately, I found myself irritated by his compliance. I wanted a fight. I wanted him to tell me I was being unreasonable, but he just quietly sorted the cans and bottles, then came back and asked if there was anything else I needed before he went to bed. His kindness felt like an accusation. The confrontation I never expected came on a random Tuesday. I'd been careless, leaving my laptop open with message notifications from Darren popping up. Nothing explicitly inappropriate, but the familiarity was unmistakable. "Getting drinks with the team tonight?" Huey didn't say anything right away. He just quietly made dinner, did the dishes, and then sat across from me at the kitchen table with this eerily calm expression I'd never seen before. "Is there something going on between you and Darren?" Simple question. No accusation in his tone. For some reason, that made me explode. I slammed my hand on the table, sending my wine glass toppling. "Are you kidding me? You're spying on my messages now?" I screeched. I was creating this massive smokescreen, hoping he'd get so caught up defending himself against the privacy invasion accusation that he'd forget his original question. But Huey didn't take the bait. "You check my phone constantly," he said, still unnervingly calm. "I've never once objected. So let's try again. Is there something going on with Darren?" I felt cornered. When deflection didn't work, I switched tactics. "He understands me in ways you never have," I said, voice dripping with disdain. "He actually supports my ambitions instead of being threatened by them." Huey just nodded, like I was confirming something he already knew, and then he asked the question that would haunt me. "Veronica, do you actually think I'm your soulmate? Did you ever?" The rawness in his voice momentarily cut through my defenses. For 1 second, I could have salvaged something, could have been honest in a way that wasn't cruel. Instead, I laughed, actually laughed, and delivered the line that would end everything. "You were just the most convenient option. I never believed in soulmates anyway." His face didn't crumple like I expected. He didn't yell or plead. He just absorbed the blow, nodded once, and said, "Thank you for finally being honest." Then he got up and walked out of the kitchen. No dramatics. No door slamming. Just quiet, dignified exit that somehow hurt worse than any reaction I'd anticipated. I sat there, wine soaking into my sleeve, feeling like I'd just set fire to my safety net without checking if there was ground beneath me. I spent that night waiting for him to come to bed, to continue the conversation, to give me a chance to soften what I'd said. But he slept in the guest room, and the next morning, he was gone before I woke up. Just a note saying he'd be staying with a friend for a few days to clear his head. It was the first time in 6 years he'd ever chosen to put space between us after a fight. The silence was deafening. I kept checking my phone, expecting his usual text to check in, to make sure things were okay between us. Nothing. I called him that night, ready with a half-hearted apology designed to make him feel guilty for overreacting. It went straight to voicemail. 3 times. I left increasingly desperate messages, each one less apologetic and more accusatory than the last. "Real mature, ignoring me like this," the final one ended. As soon as I hung up, I regretted it, but my pride wouldn't let me call back to fix it. I expected Huey to come crawling back the next day, to beg for another chance, to promise he'd try harder, be more exciting, more whatever I needed. That's what had always happened before when I pushed him away. But something had shifted. He came home after 3 days, not to reconcile, but to start untangling our lives with this quiet efficiency that was honestly terrifying. He transferred his portion of joint bills to my name without discussion. When I tried crying, actual tears this time, He just handed me a box of tissues and continued sorting through financial documents. You don't have to do this, I said, trying to sound reasonable. We can work through this. Couples fight. He looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Not angry, not sad, just clear. This wasn't a fight, Veronica. This was a moment of truth. He finally said what I've suspected for years, that I was never more than a convenient option for you, and I deserve better than that. My backup plan was falling apart too. When I texted Darren that things were complicated at home, hoping for some emotional support, his response was lukewarm at best. That sucks. Hope you work it out. The excitement of the chase was over, and apparently so was his interest. At work, I overheard him using the exact same lines on Rachel from accounting that he'd used on me, the ones I thought were special. When I confronted him about it, he looked at me like I was crazy. You're being too sensitive, he said, my own words thrown back at me. That's when it hit me. I might actually lose Huey. Not in the theoretical way I'd sometimes fantasized about when I was bored or annoyed, but in the real, permanent way that would leave me alone with my own company. The thought terrified me. Not because I suddenly realized I loved him deeply or couldn't live without him, but because I'd gotten comfortable with the safety and stability he provided. I'd taken for granted that he would always be there, no matter how poorly I treated him. I tried a different approach with Huey. I cooked his favorite meal, wore the dress he liked, attempted to have an actual conversation about our future, but it was a transparent ploy, and we both knew it. What exactly are you trying to say, Veronica? He asked. The relationship you've been actively sabotaging for years, or just your idea of having me as a backup plan? I had no answer that wasn't selfish. One night, I made another desperate attempt, suggesting we go to couples counseling. I want to understand why I do the things I do, I said, trying to sound sincere. I want to be better. He looked at me for a long moment. I suggested therapy 2 years ago, he said quietly. You said it was for weak people who couldn't solve their own problems. What changed? I didn't have a good answer because he was right. Nothing had changed except the reality that I was losing my grip on him. As the reality set in that he was actually leaving, I oscillated between rage and desperate attempts to keep him. After everything I've done for you, I said one night, voice shaking with anger. That's when he disappeared into his office and returned with a notebook. Pages and pages documenting our entire relationship. Things he'd done for me, things I'd done for him, promises kept and broken on both sides. The imbalance was staggering. Seeing it all laid out that way made me furious. You've been keeping score this whole time? I screamed, smacking the notebook from his hands, pages scattering across the floor. What kind of person does that? The kind who's been gaslighted for years, he replied quietly, not even bothering to pick up the pages. The kind who needed proof he wasn't crazy. I lunged for the pages, tearing some of them in my rage. You had no right, I screamed, though I couldn't articulate exactly what he had no right to do. Document my emotional abuse? Remember the truth when I tried to rewrite it? His calm in the face of my storm only enraged me further. I wanted him to crack, to show me I still had power over his emotions. But he just watched me, a sadness in his eyes that looked a lot like pity. I hope someday you find whatever it is you're looking for, Veronica, he said when I finally ran out of steam. But I don't think it was ever me. He walked past me then, careful not to touch me, and spent the night packing his essentials. I heard him on the phone, making arrangements. The quiet purposefulness of his actions scared me more than any anger could have. When manipulation failed, I got nasty. I told our friends that Huey had been emotionally unavailable, that he'd prioritized work over our marriage, that there had been someone else on his side. I expected our social circle to rally around me like they always had. Instead, Jen, my closest friend, actually called me out. Veronica, I've watched how you treat him for years. The constant put-downs, the controlling behavior. I never said anything because I didn't think it was my place, but I'm not going to help you trash him now. Her words shocked me into silence. Had everyone seen through me all this time? Had my behavior been so obvious to everyone except me? I hung up on her and immediately called Sarah, sure she'd take my side. But there was a hesitation in her voice too when I launched into my victim narrative. Have you considered that maybe you both contributed to the problems? She asked carefully. I hung up on her too. The final conversation happened the day he moved his last boxes out. I demanded to know why he was giving up so easily. 6 years together, and you're just walking away without a fight? I said, blocking the doorway. Huey looked at me with this mixture of pity and relief that made my stomach turn. I'm not giving up, he said. I'm choosing myself for once. And honestly, Veronica, you never fought for us either. You just fought to keep me under your control. That's not true, I protested, but even I could hear the hollowness in my words. I loved you in my own way. Your way of loving was to tear me down so I wouldn't leave, he said. That's not love, that's fear. He gently moved me aside and carried the last box to his car. Before driving away, he paused. I don't hate you, Veronica. I hope you find peace with yourself someday. And then he was gone, leaving me with a half-empty house and the realization that I'd sabotaged the one stable thing in my life because stability felt too much like boredom. I spent the next few weeks telling myself I was better off, that I'd dodged a bullet, that Huey just didn't try hard enough to understand my complexity. I made myself the victim in a story where I had always been the aggressor. But reality has a way of cutting through even the most elaborate self-deception. The house felt too quiet. My phone stopped lighting up with his check-in texts. The plants he used to care for started dying one by one because I kept forgetting to water them. Small reminders that he'd been the one maintaining so many things I took for granted. 6 months later, I saw him at the local coffee shop. He was laughing with someone I didn't recognize, looking lighter than I'd ever seen him. The tension he'd always carried in his shoulders completely gone. My heart did this weird little flip. Not quite jealousy, not quite regret, but something uncomfortable that I didn't want to examine too closely. I approached with practiced casualness, expecting him to still crave my approval on some level. You look good, I said with the smile that used to make him melt. He looked at me politely, the way you'd look at a former coworker you barely remembered. Thanks, you too, he said. No lingering gaze, no hint of longing, not even anger. Just nothing. Complete indifference. He excused himself after 30 seconds of small talk, and as I watched him walk away, it hit me. The one consequence I never considered. I had made myself completely irrelevant to someone who once would have done anything for me. I'd like to say this was my rock-bottom moment, that I had some profound realization about my toxic behavior and vowed to change. But the truth is much uglier. I was angry he'd moved on. Angry he'd found happiness without me. Angry that the power I thought I had was an illusion all along. Even now, telling this story, I'm painting myself as somewhat self-aware, somewhat regretful, when really I'm just resentful that my actions finally had consequences. Maybe that's the real lesson here. We don't always get the character growth we need in the time frame we want it. Sometimes we just get the loneliness we've earned.